What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, and today I'm back to talk to you about Warhammer 40K, more specifically, the new rules that 9th edition will be bringing to us wargamers. So recently, the Warhammer community has been giving us some faction focuses on the different armies of 40k. We've gotten ones for Necrons, the Primaris Marines, and there's been a bunch. And sprinkled out throughout all these faction focuses are inklings to new rules from 9th edition. So I'm going to be putting the links down at the bottom so you guys can read these for yourselves. But without further ado, let's dive in. Now, before we get into the actual rules, I did want to cover this one specific Primaris unit, the Outrider. So the Outrider is essentially a biker unit for Primaris Marines, and wow, the stats for this is insane. So first of all, most things that are all about moving faster than your standard infantry, they have a 12-inch movement, but not the Outrider. They can move 14 inches. Now that is great. Besides that, everything else is pretty standard. Weapon skill, ballistic skill 3+, strength is 4, toughness is 5 because they're on top of the bike. They've got 4 wounds, which is crazy. 2 attacks, leadership 7, 3-up save. So yeah, these guys are going to be one of the better units, I believe, from the new 9th edition box set. The Outriders are just crazy fast and very resilient. I mean, they don't have an invuln save, but maybe there's some item you can purchase for them, like a Rosarius or something like that. But still, 4 wounds, moving 14 inches, that is really, really good. Now, I covered this in a previous video, but I'm going to add it here just because it's a vast change to the rules, and that is that Overwatch has now become a stratagem. It is now 1 command point, and you can declare a single unit to fire at a charging unit. Now, normally, this would mean defeat for armies that aren't good in close combat, such as the poor Tau, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be other rules, other types of way to supplement this throughout the battlefield, so don't start hating your Tau, don't pick up a new army, because there's going to be rules around this. But still, Overwatch becoming a stratagem, that is a huge, huge thing. In the Sisters of Battle faction focus, they've got rules for Lookout Sir. And what it says here is that models cannot target a unit that contains any character models with a wound characteristic of 9 or less, with a ranged weapon, as long as they're within 3 inches of another friendly vehicle or monster unit, or if they're within 3 inches of any other friendly unit that has 3 or more models, unless the character unit is both visible to the firing model and it's the closest unit to the firing model. So that's going to make it a lot harder to target characters with just plain old weapons. Obviously, if you got snipers, you can mitigate this. However, the rule continues saying that you ignore other enemy character models with a wound characteristic of 9 or less when determining if the target is the closest enemy unit to the firing model. So it's similar to the previous Lookout Sir, but a little bit different. In the Adeptus Mechanicus section, you have the core stratagem, Desperate Breakout, for 2 command points. So what this stratagem does is that you use it in the movement phase, and then you select a single unit from your army that has not been selected to move this phase, and that is within engagement range to at least 1 enemy unit. Basically, if it's a unit you control that's stuck in combat. So then, you roll a d6 for each model, and as a result of 1, that model is destroyed. So if you roll all 1s, potentially you could lose the entire unit. However, once you do that, then you start falling back with those models, moving past any enemy models if they weren't there, and if any models still are within the engagement range, then they're destroyed. Now let's assume that those models don't die and they do move away from the range, then they cannot do anything else for that turn, even if there's a rule that would allow them to do so after falling back. So I think this 2 command point stratagem is saying that once you're in close combat, you're pretty much stuck there unless you use Desperate Breakout to fall away. Same thing with the stratagem for firing Overwatch, depending on your army. I'm sure there's going to be other ways to fall back without having to rely on this stratagem. But still, like, this is this edition is leaning heavily towards melee armies. It's like, we're gonna charge you, and you're gonna have to decide if you want to spend command points to overwatch us. And not just that, once we are in combat, we're gonna make you decide to either use more command points to break away, or you're just gonna get hit hard. Really great if you're playing orcs, Tyranids, Khorne Berserkers, that kind of play style. Really sucks if you play Tau. But again, I'm pretty sure there's going to be other ways to mitigate these, I guess, the scales tipping towards the favor of melee armies. I'm surprised they even had this for the Skitarii faction focus. It would have made sense to put it with like the orcs or something like that. Anyway, let's move on. On the Craftworld Eldari faction focus, we have an objective that has been revealed to us. A progressive objective, meaning there's going to be like secondary objectives, main objectives, and so forth. But this one is called Engage on All Fronts. It says, you score 2 victory points at the end of your turn if you have 1 or more units from your army wholly within 3 different table quarters, and those units are more than 6 inches from the center of the battlefield. And then the little cherry on top is you score 3 victory points if you have 1 or more units from your army wholly within each table quarter that's more than 6 inches away from the center of the battlefield. So this basically just means that you've spread your army across the entire board. You have superiority in deciding where your army goes, how to shut down your enemy. I really like this one because it really focuses on not just like castling your army. It's like you actually have to spread out and take control of the battlefield. And then we come to one of the more controversial ones found in the faction focus for the Tyranids. This one is called Dense Cover, and boy oh boy is it such a wall of text that you could use the rule itself as dense cover. I mean, it's simple to understand, but they just go so in depth. So let me read it, and without reading it twice, let me know if you understand this just by reading it the first time. So here goes. If this terrain feature is at least 3 inches in height, then subtract 1 from the hit roll when resolving an attack with a ranged weapon, unless you can draw straight lines 1 millimeter in thickness to every single part of at least one model's base, or hull, in the target unit from a single point on the attacking model's base or hull without any of those lines passing over through or any part of the terrain feature with this trait. That is a single sentence. Models that are on or within an area terrain feature this trait do not suffer the penalty if they are the only terrain feature that these lines pass over or through is the terrain feature that the attacking model is on or within. Models within 3 inches of an obstacle terrain feature with this trait do not suffer this penalty if the only terrain feature these lines pass over or through is the terrain feature that the attacking model is within 3 inches of. The height of a terrain feature is measured from the highest point on that terrain feature. Whew, that is quite the mouthful. And just below that, they have 3 bullet points that just sum it up perfectly. Subtract 1 from hit rolls made for ranged weapons if the terrain feature is 3 inches tall. This does not apply to models that are only shooting through their own terrain feature, and you have no penalty when shooting at aircraft units with a wound characteristic of 18 or more if they're on this terrain feature. So basically, if you're in woods, people shooting at you get a -1. You don't suffer that penalty. You only get the -1 if your entire unit is within the woods. And if you're an aircraft hovering above woods or whatnot, you don't get the penalty for being shot at if you have the wound characteristic of 18 or more. Not that hard. I don't know why they gotta have such a wall of text right here. It's crazy. But I guess they're doing this to kind of like shut down the quote-unquote that guy from like bending the rules to his advantage. I know this used to happen a lot with like buildings and windows. It's like, can you shoot through it? What if you can see the entire unit? You have a massive like Carnifex behind some windows. Do they get saved? Do they not? I think this is why GW is doing this, to just kind of mitigate any potential issues that could happen, especially during tournaments. If you're playing at home, or if you guys aren't too nitpicky about the rules, I guess this shouldn't become an issue. But you know, sometimes you play against that guy, and it's a little like, why? And finally, the last rule that I'm going to be talking about today is that of strategic reserves. So, what this means is that you have the ability to place unit into reserves based on command points. So, and this is also based on the power rating of the units that are going to be placed into reserves. So if the power level of the unit placed into reserves is between 1 to 9, that costs a single command point to do. 10 to 19, 2 command points. 20 to 29, 3 command points. 30 to 39, 4. 40 to 49, 5 command points, etc., etc. So once you put a unit in strategic reserves, they are essentially off the battlefield, and you get to choose when they come in. Depending on when they come in, they get certain, advantages. So for example, during the first battle round, no reserves can come in. During the second battle round, you can set up whatever units you put into strategic reserves wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge that's not the enemy battlefield edge or the enemy deployment zone. Battle round 3 and up, you can set up wholly within 6 inches of any battlefield edge, but not the enemy battlefield edge, meaning you could still deploy on the enemy deployment zone, which is really interesting. However, wherever you set up your enemy or your units, they cannot be within 9 inches of enemy models. Same thing as you're coming in from deep strike. Strategic reserve units cannot make a normal move, they cannot advance or fall back in that turn. They always count as having moved, and any strategic reserve unit not set up on the battlefield by the end of the battle counts as being destroyed. It really never made sense to me why you'd want to keep them in reserves and never put them on the battlefield. You're just playing at a huge handicap, because that's a certain amount of power or a certain amount of points that you're limiting yourself from using. So this is cool and all, because models that normally can't be put in deep strike or like scout moves or anything like that, you can put them in reserves and have them pop out where you want them, when you want them, and that's really good. Not just that, but you have an ability called lying in ambush. So what it says here is that strategic reserves aren't all about outflanking the enemy. Should your opponent overcommit with their initial attacks, it is possible to deliver a punishing counterblow with your reinforcements. Strategic reserve units can't normally be set up within 9 inches of enemy models, but if you set them up within 1 inch of your own battlefield edge, they can be set up within this distance, and even within the 1 inch engagement range of enemy models. This is big. If they do so, they count as being already made a charge move, and your opponent will not be able to fire Overwatch against them. So let's say your opponent just rushes his whole army towards you, and it's turn 3, and they're pretty much right on your deployment zone. Now you can rush in with your strategic reserves coming in from your table edge, and they could come in and be already in combat. That is great. That is amazing. That is something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people will be hopefully using, because let's say you've got a unit of Blood Angels and they've got chain swords and bolt pistols, but for some reason you didn't give them jump packs. So instead of foot slugging them across the table, getting shot turn after turn, trying to get into combat, you could put them in strategic reserves. And let's say your opponent does overextend, now they could come in from the table edge already into combat and just work their blades and bolt pistols directly into the enemy models without worrying about missing that charge range, missing models and dying from Overwatch. They're just going to be right in there, in the thick of it, doing what they were meant to do from the beginning. I really like strategic reserves, although it could be costly depending on how many you put in reserves, but command points are easier to get, and not just that, but at the beginning of the command phase, I believe that's what it's called, you always get a command point, a single command point, every command phase, which is really great. Maybe that mitigates the whole fear of spending all your command points too soon, knowing that you're going to at least get 1 command point per turn. So with that being said, what do you guys love about these new ninth edition rules? What do you hate about these new ninth edition rules? Do you think that GW is being too wordy with their rules in this edition? Because I've been seeing the community just like spaz out over like the wall of text that we're receiving. But yeah, this edition is going to be crazy. It's going to be balls to the wall, all out mayhem because point costs are going up. Um, it seems like it's going to be much more devastating. The game itself will be over much quickly because of all the damage certain models can do, the amount of command points available to just create more crazy mayhem on the battlefield. It is going to be crazy. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Are you enjoying it? Will you not be playing ninth edition? And if not, which edition will you be playing? What edition have you loved? And yeah, just let me know your thoughts overall. As always, this has been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll be catching you guys in the next one. Peace.